I still remember the day as if it were seared into my memory with fire. The air was warm, the sky a pale blue, and my wife was cradling our newborn daughter in the soft glow of morning sunlight. We had just moved into this neighborhood 3 weeks earlier, thinking it was going to be the perfect place to raise a family. The house sat at the edge of the HOA community, a nice 2-story with a big front porch, a fenced backyard, and just enough space for me to feel like I wasn't boxed in. After years of deployments, secret missions, and sleeping in foxholes halfway across the world, I wanted nothing more than peace. I had traded my rifle for a hammer, my tactical gear for baby carriers, and I was ready to settle into fatherhood. Every morning, I'd wake up to the sound of my daughter breathing softly in her crib, and it was a sound that felt like redemption. I thought this neighborhood would give us that peace, but I had no idea how wrong I was. The HOA president, a middle-aged woman named Karen, seemed polite at first. She dropped off a welcome packet with rules about lawn height, trash bins, and mailbox paint colors. It seemed a bit much, but I ignored it. After all, I had been under military orders stricter than any HOA's rules. But then the notes started showing up, first about the baby stroller being left near the porch, then about my truck being too tactical looking for their aesthetic. I brushed it off, until the day she came to my door. I had just gotten home from a grocery run, balancing baby formula in one hand and a box of diapers in the other, when I saw her standing there with 2 other board members. She wasn't smiling this time. Her lips were pressed thin, her clipboard clutched like a weapon, and her tone was sharp as she started talking about the disturbance our newborn was causing. Apparently, neighbors had complained that the baby's crying at night was lowering property values and creating an unsustainable noise environment. I stared at her, stunned, because this was a newborn baby, not a rock concert. I told her as calmly as I could that she was out of line, but she didn't back down. Instead, she said something that made my blood run cold. She said the HOA had authority to intervene when homeowners were creating a nuisance, and she demanded that my wife and I surrender temporary custody of our newborn so the board could determine proper accommodations for the community. It took everything in me not to laugh in her face, because I thought she was joking. But when she didn't flinch, when she stared at me with that smug superiority only a power-hungry HOA president could have, I realized she was dead serious. That was the moment something in me switched. I had been trained my whole life to stay calm under pressure, to keep my breathing steady even when bullets were flying past my head, but hearing a civilian woman threaten my family brought out something different, something primal. I told her, in a voice so low and cold that even her board members took a step back, that she would never, under any circumstance, lay a hand on my child. My wife, who had been sitting on the porch rocking the baby, heard my tone and knew immediately this wasn't just a neighborly disagreement anymore. Karen puffed herself up and said we'd be fined heavily if we didn't comply. Fines didn't scare me. War zones don't prepare you for much in civilian life, but they do prepare you to deal with threats, and this was a threat, no matter how suburban it looked. I went inside, locked the door, and tried to focus on my daughter's tiny face, her perfect little hands gripping my finger. I whispered to her that nobody would ever hurt her, not while I was breathing. That night, I sat at the kitchen table, pulling out old skills I thought I'd never use again. I mapped out the HOA bylaws, every clause and subclause, every potential legal loophole. Years of Navy training had taught me to read situations like a battlefield, to find the weak points and plan accordingly. If Karen thought she could intimidate me into handing over my baby, she had just declared a war she couldn't win. And unlike her, I knew how to fight wars, quietly, strategically, and with precision. The next morning, I installed new cameras around the house, reinforced the locks, and made sure every inch of the property was secured. Karen didn't know who I was, she didn't know about my SEAL background, my classified operations, or the fact that I had faced down cartel leaders, insurgents, and worse. To her, I was just another homeowner she could bully into submission. But she was about to find out the hard way that I was not built to be bullied. My wife tried to stay calm, but I could see the worry in her eyes, and that only made me double down. I had seen enough danger in my life to recognize when it was creeping close to home, and I wasn't about to let it cross my doorstep. By the end of that week, the HOA sent a formal letter demanding we attend an emergency hearing. They called it a community intervention session, but I knew exactly what it was, a power play. I tucked the letter into my pocket, kissed my wife on the forehead, and promised her I'd handle it. If they wanted a hearing, I'd give them one, but they wouldn't be the ones running it. The morning of the hearing, I woke up before sunrise, just like I had on deployment. Old habits die hard, and today I needed that edge. I brewed a pot of black coffee and sat at the kitchen table with my notes spread out like a mission briefing. Every HOA bylaw they had cited, every vague rule about nuisance behavior and community standards, was highlighted and annotated in red ink. I had spent hours digging into state property law, homeowners' rights, and legal precedents, making sure I was more prepared than they could possibly expect. When my wife woke up, I was already dressed, pressed shirt, clean shave, the kind of look that made me appear calm and in control even if I was ready for war on the inside. I kissed her and my daughter, promised them again that I'd come back with this problem solved, then got into my truck and drove to the HOA clubhouse. The clubhouse sat at the center of the community, a place that looked charming on the outside but had always felt hostile to me, like enemy territory. As I walked in, I saw them waiting, Karen at the head of a long oak table, her clipboard and laptop neatly arranged, and the two other board members flanking her like bodyguards. A few homeowners were sitting in the back, curious neighbors who had clearly been invited to watch the spectacle. Karen smiled at me, but it was the kind of smile a predator gives before the first strike. She called the meeting to order and immediately started listing violations: the baby crying, my truck parked at the wrong angle, the stroller left on the porch. She spoke like a prosecutor, confident and sharp, and then she said the words I'd been waiting for. She formally recommended that the HOA take temporary custodial oversight of my child to preserve community harmony. That was when I stood up. I didn't shout, I didn't bang the table, I simply stood, slowly, deliberately, the way I had done in war rooms when a commanding officer gave an order I was about to counter. The room went silent. I told them, in a calm, steady voice, that what they were proposing was not only unlawful, but criminal. I pulled out my notes and read state statutes aloud, word for word, showing that the HOA had no authority over children, no jurisdiction over custody, and that their demand could be considered harassment and even attempted interference with parental rights. Karen's smug expression faltered, but I didn't stop. I went through every single violation they had listed, dismantling their claims one by one, citing cases and precedents. By the time I was done, there was no legal ground left under their feet. But I wasn't finished. I leaned forward on the table and told them that if they ever came near my house again, if they ever threatened my wife or my child again, I would pursue legal action personally. I told them I had already spoken to an attorney who specialized in HOA abuse cases and had filed a preliminary complaint with the State Housing Authority. That last part was technically not true yet, but it would be by the end of the day. Karen's face went pale, but I could see the stubbornness in her eyes, the refusal to back down. She started to say something about community cohesion and rules being rules, but I cut her off. I told them who I was. I told them about the years I had served as a Navy SEAL, the deployments, the classified operations, the missions where I had protected people far from home, and that if I could defend strangers overseas, they'd better believe I would defend my family right here in my own neighborhood. I didn't raise my voice, but the weight of what I was saying hung heavy in the air. The neighbors in the back of the room shifted uncomfortably. Some looked impressed, others looked afraid, but none of them said a word. For the first time since we'd moved in, Karen was speechless. The meeting ended in silence. No fines were issued, no custody recommendations were made, and nobody tried to stop me as I walked out. But I knew this wasn't over. People like Karen didn't back down just because they lost once. They regrouped, they schemed, they came back harder. And I was ready for that. I had spent my entire career training to stay one step ahead of the enemy, and I wasn't about to let my guard down now. When I got home, my wife was waiting for me, her eyes searching my face for answers. I told her what happened, told her it was handled for now, but I also told her to stay alert. That night, I set up motion lights around the property, checked the camera feeds, and made sure my security system was running at full capacity. Something in my gut told me Karen wasn't finished, and my gut had never been wrong. Sure enough, 2 nights later, the cameras caught something, Karen herself walking up to our porch after midnight, peering into the windows, and taking photos with her phone. I downloaded the footage, stored it on 3 different drives, and printed still frames. The next morning, I sent them to my lawyer, to the HOA board, and to the county sheriff's department. I filed a harassment complaint and requested a restraining order. If Karen wanted to escalate, I was going to escalate faster. And yet, there was a strange calm in me now. I wasn't reacting out of fear, I was operating out of strategy, just like I had been trained. This wasn't just about stopping her anymore. This was about making sure nobody in this neighborhood, or any HOA anywhere, thought they could ever try something like this again. I had fought wars overseas to protect freedom, and I wasn't going to let some power-hungry neighbor strip mine from my own family. I thought the restraining order and the sheriff's report would be enough to make Karen back off, but I underestimated just how far she was willing to go. People like her don't just stop, they double down. A week passed quietly, too quietly, and I should have known that silence wasn't peace. It was preparation. Then, one Friday night, it happened. We had just put the baby to bed and were settling on the couch when I heard tires screech outside. My security cameras sent me alerts, and I pulled up the feed on my phone. A group of people were standing on my lawn, Karen among them, holding flashlights and what looked like a clipboard full of papers. My wife froze, clutching my arm, and I told her to take the baby to the safe room in the back of the house. She didn't argue. She knew that tone in my voice meant things were about to get serious. I stepped outside, calm and deliberate, but inside every nerve in my body was firing. Karen was already shouting about removing the child for community safety. This time, she hadn't just brought board members, she had brought 2 hired private security guards, big guys who looked like they were there to intimidate me. That was her first mistake. She thought numbers would scare me, but all they did was wake up the part of me that had faced down armed men in villages halfway across the globe. I told them all to get off my property immediately. Karen ignored me, waving the clipboard like it was some kind of legal warrant. I moved closer, slow but purposeful, and took the papers out of her hand. They weren't legal documents. They were a mock custody agreement the HOA had drawn up, unsigned, unofficial, nothing that held any power. She had staged this entire thing to scare us into handing over our baby. My hands were steady as I tore the papers in half and dropped them at her feet. That's when one of the security guards stepped forward, and I saw his hand hover near his belt like he was ready to grab me if Karen gave the word. That was his second mistake. I didn't raise my voice, didn't break my stance. I told him plainly that if he set one foot on my porch, would consider him a physical threat to my family. I had every right to defend my home, and I was fully capable of doing so. He hesitated, looked at Karen, then took a step back. She was losing control of her little show, and she knew it. That's when she made her third and biggest mistake, she called the police. She must have thought they'd side with her, must have believed that her version of events would be enough to get me in trouble. But when the police arrived, I was ready. I had footage from the cameras queued up, showing Karen trespassing, shouting threats, and attempting to force entry by stepping onto my porch. I calmly explained that I had a restraining order against her, that she was violating it, and that she was trying to illegally remove my child from my home. The officers took one look at the footage, one look at the so-called custody agreement, and put Karen in the back of the cruiser. For the first time since we had moved in, she wasn't the one in control. But I knew this wasn't over. People like her don't learn, they stew, they get angrier, and they come back with lawyers and loopholes. I spent the next few days upgrading everything: new cameras with higher resolution, reinforced gates, a new alarm system that connected directly to law enforcement. I even installed perimeter sensors that would alert me if anyone stepped foot on my property without permission. It wasn't paranoia. It was preparation. My wife was shaken, but she was also proud. She told me she had never seen me so calm under pressure, and I told her that's what training was for. Years of missions had taught me that panic gets you killed, planning keeps you alive. And right now, we had something more important than our lives to protect. We had our daughter. Every time I held her, every time I looked into her tiny face, it reminded me why I was fighting this hard. But then came the retaliation. Karen got out of jail within 24 hours, apparently the HOA board pooled money for her bail. The very next day, I found notices posted all over my property: fines for aggressive conduct, fines for creating a hostile environment, even fines for unauthorized security upgrades. They were trying to financially crush me. That was their new tactic. They thought they could bankrupt me, force me to sell the house, and get rid of me that way. I had seen this kind of pressure before, in different forms, in different countries, and I knew exactly how to respond. I didn't pay a dime. Instead, I filed a countersuit. My lawyer drafted a complaint against the HOA for harassment, trespassing, emotional distress, and violation of property rights. We sent copies to every board member, every homeowner in the community, and even the local news station. If they wanted to make this public, I was going to make it louder than they ever expected. Within 48 hours, half the neighborhood was talking about it, some siding with Karen, some siding with us. The HOA was fracturing under the pressure, and I was just getting started. The real turning point came a week later, when I caught Karen again on camera, this time cutting through my side yard in the middle of the night. She wasn't just snooping anymore, she was sabotaging. She had a pair of wire cutters in her hand, and she was about to cut the line to one of my cameras when my motion floodlights kicked on. She froze like a deer in headlights, then bolted. That footage was the final nail in the coffin. My lawyer took it straight to the county prosecutor, and this time she wasn't just charged with trespassing, she was charged with attempted vandalism and violation of a restraining order, a much more serious offense. When the police came to arrest her again, I watched from my porch, my daughter asleep in my arms. This time there were no HOA members standing by her side. This time, she didn't shout, didn't argue. She just glared at me as they put her in the back of the car, and I knew she was thinking of her next move. But so was I, and I had no intention of letting her take another step toward my family. When Karen was hauled off in the back of that cruiser for the second time, I knew the balance had shifted. The HOA had gone from the aggressor to the one on the defensive, and now it was my turn to go on the offensive. I wasn't just going to protect my family anymore, I was going to make sure no one in this neighborhood ever suffered under that kind of abuse again. The first step was gathering allies. Over the next several days, I went door to door, calmly explaining what had happened, showing neighbors the security footage and the letters, letting them see for themselves how far Karen had gone. People who had once been silent out of fear were suddenly speaking up. I learned that Karen had fined an elderly couple for leaving a lawn ornament out too long, threatened to sue a single mom for letting her kids chalk on the sidewalk, and even tried to evict a veteran neighbor for flying the American flag without prior board approval. The more I listened, the more determined I became. This wasn't just about my family anymore, this was about taking back control of the entire HOA. I started organizing meetings at my house, unofficial gatherings where neighbors could vent and share stories. At first there were 5 of us, then 10, then nearly 24. We formed a coalition, a group dedicated to voting out the current board at the next election. But I wasn't going to wait for election day, I wanted action now. I researched the bylaws again and found a clause that allowed for a special recall election if enough homeowners signed a petition. It required 51% of the community's signatures, which wasn't going to be easy, but I had something the board didn't: proof of corruption and harassment. I spent days canvassing, knocking on doors, shaking hands, explaining everything in detail. Some neighbors were hesitant, afraid of retaliation, but when I showed them the footage of Karen trespassing at night, cutting wires, and demanding my newborn, their fear turned to anger. Signature by signature, we built momentum. Within 3 weeks, we had more than enough. I turned the petition in with a copy of the restraining order and a letter from my lawyer formally demanding a recall vote. The board tried to delay it, but I had anticipated that move too. We filed an injunction with the county to compel them to hold the vote immediately. The night of the recall election, the clubhouse was packed wall-to-wall with homeowners. People who had never shown up to HOA meetings before were there, sitting in folding chairs, arms crossed, waiting to see what would happen. Karen wasn't there, of course, she was still dealing with the legal fallout from her arrest, but the other board members were, and they looked like they hadn't slept in days. I stood at the front of the room and spoke plainly. I didn't yell, didn't rant, didn't make it personal. I simply laid out the facts: the harassment, the illegal demands, the trespassing, the abuse of power. Then I told them what I believed, that an HOA should serve its homeowners, not control them. That it should protect the community, not threaten it. When the votes were counted, the result wasn't even close. Nearly 3/4 of the neighborhood voted to remove the entire board effective immediately. People actually cheered, clapping, shouting, hugging each other, like a weight had been lifted off their shoulders. And just like that, the HOA's reign of fear was over. But I wasn't finished yet. I ran for president of the new board, and thanks to the trust we had built, I was elected unanimously. For the first time, I wasn't just defending my family, I was in a position to change the rules entirely. My first act as HOA president was to rewrite the policies that had been abused. We eliminated arbitrary fines, limited the board's power to interfere with homeowners' personal lives, and put in strict transparency requirements. Any board member who attempted to enter someone's property without permission would now face automatic removal. We also passed a family protection clause, guaranteeing that no HOA action could ever target children or parenting decisions unless there was clear evidence of abuse or danger, and even then, it had to be handled by proper authorities, not the HOA. I made sure the community newsletter publicly listed every change so everyone could see exactly what we were doing and why. The same neighbors who had once lived in fear were now smiling, waving, coming out of their houses again. Kids were playing in the streets, people were hosting barbecues, and for the first time, this neighborhood actually felt like a community. My wife and I could finally sit on the porch at night without looking over our shoulders. Of course, Karen wasn't gone completely. Her legal troubles were still ongoing, but I knew she'd eventually be back, even if just to glare from a distance. That didn't bother me anymore. The power she once held was gone, dismantled piece by piece, replaced with something better. And I had made sure there were safeguards in place so nobody like her could ever rise to power again. I had turned what started as a nightmare into something good, something stronger. I didn't just save my family. I saved the neighborhood. When the dust finally settled, there was a stillness over the neighborhood that I hadn't felt since the day we moved in. The chaos, the threats, the late-night confrontations, they were all gone, replaced by something quieter, steadier. For the first time in months, I woke up to the sound of my daughter cooing in her crib instead of my phone buzzing with camera alerts. My wife and I sat on the porch drinking coffee while the sun rose, and there was no pit in my stomach, no gnawing sense of anticipation that something was about to happen. It was strange at first. I had been in fight mode for so long that the idea of standing down felt almost foreign, but slowly, day by day, it began to feel natural. The HOA under my leadership became something entirely different from what Karen had run. I treated it like a mission, a long-term operation designed to keep the community stable and free from abuse. Every decision we made as a board was open for homeowners to see. We created an online portal where every dollar spent was documented, every rule change was posted for review. If someone had a complaint, it was addressed respectfully and quickly. For the first time, people felt like they actually had a say in what happened to their own homes. The fear that once lingered over this place like a storm cloud was gone. Karen's legal battles dragged on for months. She tried to sue for reinstatement to the board, tried to get the fines she had levied reinstated, even tried to claim she had been acting in the best interest of the community. The judge wasn't buying it. Between the restraining order, the security footage, and the testimony of nearly a dozen neighbors, her case crumbled. She was permanently barred from holding any HOA office, fined for harassment and trespassing, and ordered to pay restitution for legal costs she had caused the community. Watching her stand there in court while the judge read the verdict was the final closure I didn't even realize I needed. It wasn't about revenge anymore, it was about justice. And justice was served. I made it my personal mission to keep this neighborhood safe from anyone like her ever again. We set up a rotating community watch, not because we were afraid, but because we wanted to stay connected and vigilant. I taught a few of the neighbors some basic self-defense techniques, things I'd learned during my years in the Navy that could help them stay calm and in control if they were ever confronted. It wasn't about turning this place into a fortress, it was about giving everyone a sense of security. Life slowly became normal again. I took my daughter to the park without glancing over my shoulder. My wife started inviting friends over for dinner again, and laughter filled our house where there had once been tension. On weekends, we hosted barbecues and block parties, something nobody had done here in years. Kids ran through sprinklers, neighbors swapped recipes, and people actually smiled at each other instead of looking down and hurrying past. The place we had once feared was finally the home we had dreamed of when we first moved in. There were moments, late at night when the house was quiet, when I would think back to how close we had come to losing everything. I'd sit in the nursery watching my daughter sleep, her tiny chest rising and falling, and I'd feel that same surge of protectiveness I had felt the day Karen first came to our door. But now it wasn't fear driving me, it was pride. Pride that we had stood our ground. Pride that I had used every skill, every lesson from my time in the service, to keep my family safe. Pride that we had turned something ugly into something better. Looking back, I realized that Karen had underestimated me from the start. She thought I was just another homeowner she could bully into compliance. She didn't know about the years I had spent kicking down doors in hostile territory, the nights I had spent with my heart hammering as I waited for an ambush, the calm that came over me when everything was on the line. She didn't understand that once I commit to something, I don't stop until the mission is complete. And this mission, protecting my family, would never be over. Months later, when my daughter took her first steps across the living room floor, I felt a lump rise in my throat. This was what all of it had been for, every late-night patrol, every court filing, every confrontation. I wasn't just fighting for today. I was fighting for her future, for the chance for her to grow up in a place where she could feel safe, where she could laugh and play without fear. I know there will always be people like Karen in the world, people who crave power, who try to control others, who let fear and ego drive them to do terrible things. But now I also know that there will always be people like me, people willing to stand up, to push back, to defend what matters. And as long as I'm here, as long as I'm breathing, nobody will ever take that from us again. The Navy taught me a lot of things: discipline, endurance, how to keep my head clear under fire, but maybe the most important lesson was this: you don't walk away from a fight when the stakes are high. You finish it. And that's what I had done here. I had finished it. As the seasons changed and the neighborhood grew quieter, I finally let myself breathe. For the first time since we moved in, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: peace.